Hello,
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing alright. Hope you are.
Can't complain. Can't complain.
I just got home from work.
Yeah, I just got into Charleston. I've got some work to do down here this week.
Oh, nice. I'll be there in April.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What's going on in Charleston for you?
My mom got a lot of friends there. She
Yeah.
went through a conference of Jewish educators. She um she teaches um Hebrew school, and she's taught Hebrew school since 1998. So
So
she
a
went
couple days anyway.
a couple days more than a couple days.
Yeah, yeah.
So I taught Hebrew school as well, but I realized that was my full-time job and Hebrew school that was making me go cross-eyed. So
I
I,
I
I
understand.
quit that and I needed my Sundays back.
Yeah, that's the only day I really have to do anything for myself or around the house or anything like that is Sunday.
Yeah. So um so it was nice for a little extra cash, but I was like burned out.
Yeah, I yeah, when you don't have time to yourself, it can happen.
But
Happen to
when
me.
my mom or my stepdad says, Michael, can you sub for me this date at this time? I'm like, sure.
Yeah.
Make trying to make it like after 5 o'clock. 'Cause one time they said, "Can you make it 4:30?" I said, "For you, yeah." Oh, Rachel,
Hey,
I
Rachel.
I
Hey.
had forgotten there was none last week. Um, they said, "See y'all in 2 weeks." I realized after we got off the call that they said, "No, see y'all in 2 weeks."
Well,
So,
it's good. It's good we didn't just leave too early.
yeah, my bad.
Yeah,
I
no worries.
was not paying any attention, but when you're riding in the dark through the mountains of Tennessee, it's hard to pay much attention.
Yes, you really need to be paying attention to where you're going because those mountains will get you.
Well, that was my mom's job. My job was not to get car sick.
That's my
And
problem.
yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
uh,
I think we've all gotten
Hello,
car sick driving.
everybody.
Hey,
hey,
Sue, how are you?
how are
I'm
you
fine,
doing?
thank you. How are all of you?
Tired.
Very good.
Tired.
Are you working hard, Chris?
Uh, I drove for 6 hours today. That was about as hard as I worked, but it took it out of me.
Where
Oh,
did you drive
God.
from to?
I drove from home to
To,
Charleston, South Carolina.
oh, well, that's a nice place to visit.
Yeah, I unfortunately I'm not in the nice part. I'm they tend to put water plants and wastewater plants in the bad parts of town. So
I would think that's correct. I
yeah,
would
I'm
think
actually
that's correct.
I think I'm in Ashley. I don't know, Rachel, does
Oh,
that
In
sound like a
West
place I can?
Ashley?
wait,
Yeah, that's
West
where we had the
Ashley?
apartment.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yep.
wait, you're in West Ashley?
I think so. I'm on Ashley Phosphate Road right now, but
Go.
I'll go to Hand to Hand tomorrow, their water treatment plant.
you aren't kosher, are you?
Yes, I try to be when
Well,
possible. Is there a place out here?
then don't go to Swig and Swine.
Pro tip.
Okay, because I was gonna recommend to go there, but since you're since you're trying to be kosher, I would not go
Yeah,
near there.
I need to look on the DoorDash and see what's around. I found a nice falafel place when I was staying closer to town.
But
Um,
yeah,
All
one of
kinds of
my
great
mom's
oyster
friends
places if you're
lives
into
right
oysters.
there.
No?
No,
Oh,
no,
what do you
never been
know,
a fan
Chris?
of oysters. Even when I wasn't keeping kosher, like yeah, oysters were not
Not
mm,
your thing.
slimy little. Bleh.
We will ignore that, Rachel, right? How long are you in Charleston, Chris?
Through tomorrow afternoon, and then I'll make my way back home. I've got to stop in Whitmer, South Carolina, Whitmer, Georgia, Whitmer, someplace. I think it's South Carolina, which is kind of over, well, closer to me. I don't even know
Yeah.
where it is, to be honest with you. That's my stop for tomorrow, and then I should be home either tomorrow night or Thursday.
And then do you go back to Charleston?
Oh no, 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 no! I'll be done for the week. That'll be my work will be done.
Okay. And where do you go next?
Next week, I go to Columbus, Georgia, and then Fort Benning. And I think that's all I've got planned for next week, unless something else happens somewhere else. That's my week for next week. Hey, Fred.
Hey,
hey, Fred.
hello.
Hello?
No,
So,
How are you tonight, Fred?
doing okay. Just got back from Florida,
we're in Florida.
Delray Beach. I have a cousin down there. I was
Oh,
visiting.
that Delray is so nice.
Yeah,
Um, my great aunt lives in Boynton,
yeah, same area. Yeah.
the same area, same thing.
Okay. Well, okay. This week we're starting a new book, Exodus. So that's we'll be starting it this coming Shabbat. And so it's funny. I was reading over this, to prepare for this class, and we'll see as we go through it. I think actually the movie gives a better account of it. You think about it, but we'll see as we get into the details. Is starting off with chapter 1 of Exodus. It starts off by describing the people who came down into Egypt. If somebody wants to read just verses 1 through 7 of chapter 1.
Sure. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah,
Hmm.
Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The total number of persons that were of Jacob's issue came to 70, Joseph being already in Egypt. Joseph died, and all his brothers, in all that generation. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so that the land was filled with them.
Yeah. So supposedly, the story in Egypt starts off with just 70 people. 66 who came down from Canaan, and then you have Joseph and his wife and 2 kids in Egypt already to make the 70. But there's something strange about that. If you turn back to Genesis, to chapter 46 of Genesis, and in chapter 46, verse 8 of Genesis, they actually give you the roster. They list all the people who actually came down into Egypt with Jacob, and it does come to 66 people if you actually count them. Starting with verse 8 of chapter 46, and it goes all the way through verse 27. The one problem with that, if you look over that, can anybody spot what the problem with that list is? It's very typical of the Bible, actually. Well, if you notice it, it's all men with just two exceptions. There's 64 men and two women, which, that the odds against that happening, with 12 sons, and only having two daughters between these 12 sons in a group of 66 people is astronomical odds. And basically the Bible just doesn't count women usually here. Yeah, they only list people's sons. So there were clearly, really more than 66 people. You have to assume, if the male female ratios are anywhere close to even, there had to be at least 50 or 60 women with this group, which the bit Bible just kind of ignores. And then you get the statement that they were exceedingly fertile, were multiplying.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, even if you take the 70 number, which would be the low number, there's a census that Moses takes in the desert after the Exodus, and I think we've talked about this before. You come out with this mind-boggling number. There are 603,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60. So counting all the men under 20, the men over 60, all the women, and the tribe of Levi, which isn't even counted, you're talking about well over 1 million people, probably at least 1.5 million. And how do you get there from 70? So just for fun, I actually did the math. The Bible says that the period of slavery in Egypt was 430 years. And if you assume, let's say that each century is about 3 generations, so that each of those 4 centuries would be 3 generations. So you'd have 12 generations and add 1 generation for the 30 years. If you double the 70, you do get very close to 1 million. You start with a low number, but it goes up exponentially. If you assume the population doubles with each generation. But there we're assuming that it takes 3 generations, about 33 years, to make a generation. But again, if they married young, and typically teenagers, were marrying in the Bible, you could get 4 generations into 100 years. And that would give you at least 17 generations, which puts you actually well over 1 million. So if you assume that each generation doubled, and the generation's about 25 years with young marriage, it's plausible.
I mean, we don't really take numbers. I mean, I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but we don't take numbers in the Bible all that seriously. It's like 40
Yeah,
years, everything's 40 years, 40 years.
right.
I mean,
Oh, that's true. In fact, that's where the 70 really comes from.
right.
70 is like 40. It pops up a lot in the Bible. It's kind of just one of these magic numbers the Bible has. And again, unless you assume there were only two women in that whole tribe, it obviously wasn't 70, but 70 was the ideal number the Bible likes to use. But if they were multiplying that fast, you can see why Pharaoh got upset. There was some reason for it. Okay. And then actually the next set of verses, which is 8 through 14,
I,
actually describes Pharaoh's reaction. Okay.
I can read if you want to. I'm
Sure.
not in the car like I was last time.
Okay, good. If you want to read 8 through 14 in chapter
Okay.
1.
A new king arose over Egypt who did not know about Joseph. He said to his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more numerous and stronger than we are. Get ready, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they increase and war befall us, and they join our enemies and wage war against us, and depart from the land. So they appointed over them tax collectors to afflict them with their burdens, and they built store cities for Pharaoh, namely Pithom and Ramses. But inasmuch as they would afflict them, so did they multiply, so did they gain strength, and they were disgusted because of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians enslaved the children of Israel with back-breaking labor. and they embittered their lives with and they embittered their lives with hard labor, with clay, and with bricks, and with all kinds of labor in the fields. Other work that they worked with them was back-breaking labor.
Yeah, but okay, this is Pharaoh's reaction. The rationale doesn't make a lot of sense. It says if somebody invades us, they may side with them and then get up and go up from the land, which, a lot of commentators have really been puzzled about this because if they want to go up and leave the land, Pharaoh would be glad to get rid of them. You don't have to wait for somebody, to invade the land. So that it's not really clear, what the rationale is here. But obviously, the basic fear is there are just too many of them, and they're going to overwhelm us by their numbers and take over the land. Um, the where you were reading backbreaking labor, it's an interesting Hebrew word that doesn't appear often. It's called forech. And forech actually describes labor that's not meant to be only physically demanding. It is backbreaking in that sense. It's also meant to be mentally demeaning. Work that not only exhausts you physically, but also, makes you feel small, makes you feel depressed, breaks your spirit. So this is the purpose really for the work. And then there's an interesting interlude about Pharaoh and the midwives, which is 15 through 22. Somebody want
Quick,
to read that?
quick comment question. So it begins with, there were those in the land who did not know Jacob, or Joseph, sorry, which seems pretty darn ungrateful, considering that like he
Yeah,
saved Egypt from starvation. Um, I always thought that was pretty rotten. And
yeah.
doesn't this just begin the trope of like dual like loyalties and blah 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 when it comes to Jews?
It might, yeah. Yeah, because the problem is the Bible is really bad on chronology. We don't really know how long it was between the death of Joseph and when this new Pharaoh came to the throne. I agree. If it had been 20 or 30 years, you'd really want, the memory of Joseph should still be there. Maybe it was 110 years after Joseph. Maybe this is four pharaohs down, from the one that Joseph served. That's the only way I can see that it makes any sense, really, because you're right. I mean, this guy's the savior of the nation in his generation, but apparently is forgotten later on. Yeah. But it isn't the first time that a ruler has done revisionist history. so, 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 if somebody wants to read 15 to 22, this is the next step.
Sure. And the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah, and he said, when you deliver the Hebrew women and look on the birth stool, if it is a boy, you shall put him to death, and if it is a girl, she may live. And the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had spoken to them, and they let the children live. And the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why did you do this thing, and let the children live? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, for not like the Egyptian women are the Hebrew women, for they are hardy. Before the midwife comes to them, they give birth. And God made it go well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very vast. And inasmuch as the midwives feared God, he made households for them. And Pharaoh charged his whole people, saying, every boy that is born you shall fling into the Nile, and every girl you shall let live.
It's kind of starting to think about it. Two Hebrew midwives who dared to defy Pharaoh. It's almost as a couple of Germans during the Holocaust had told Hitler, "No, we don't want to take part in this. We're not going to help rounding up the Jews. Do it on your own." And apparently they were rewarded by God for it. Pharaoh didn't punish them, which is kind of surprising to begin with. And the thing with the boys is, again, in the Bible, girls don't count. For the children of Israel to go on, it had to be males, having sons. Because if they're excess Hebrew women, they would then have to marry Egyptian men, and and for all practical purposes become Egyptian. So it's okay to save the Hebrew women to be potential wives for Egyptian men, But if there are no more Hebrew men, then the Hebrew nation dies out at that point. That was really the
So
strategy.
I would live since I'm not the firstborn.
Yeah.
Same,
My,
same.
my brother
Yeah.
would be done for.
Hey,
Yeah.
I was reading, sorry, I've been reading a bunch of commentaries on Exodus the last couple of weeks, or listening to them as I drive down the road.
Mhm.
And some people are under the impression, and I kind of like this story, is that, yeah, he tells the Hebrew midwives, and they mention the two of them, but in 17, it just says the midwives. So those
Yeah.
could even be the Egyptian midwives. I mean,
They could be. Yeah. In fact, let me look back here. I'm not sure that Hebrew midwife is. Let's see. That's verse 15. Let me just look at the
mhm,
Hebrew for a minute. No. Yeah. Yeah. No, it does say Hebrew midwives here. Of course,
right.
one modern commentators raised the question: if these Hebrews are multiplying at this fantastic rate, how can you only do with two midwives? You know,
Right.
either they were the leader of a group of, maybe they were the heads of the midwives union or something. We don't know, but there had to be more than two midwives if all this birthing was going on. So, and then it's not till you get to chapter 2 that you actually get to the story of Moses, and there, that begins with the first 10 verses, 1 through 10 of chapter 2. Uh, Sue, you want to read that?
You were a certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch, and put the child into it, and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what might befall him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile. While her maidens walked along the Nile, she spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slaves to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moses, meaning, "I drew him out of the water."
And this is actually a fairly common theme in ancient literature. Like, the fact that the hero is abandoned as a baby, and then picked up and brought up by strangers. The Roman myth of the founding of Rome was Romulus and Remus, were abandoned and actually raised by a wolf. In Egyptian mythology, the god Horus, is abandoned as a baby and then raised by strangers. So this is kind of a common theme. Um, the thing that makes you wonder, though, is I mean, her father has just issued a decree that every Hebrew baby has to be killed. And here she identifies this Hebrew baby and decides to adopt it. And the Bible doesn't really explain how she gets away with this. Did she lie to her father and say this was just an abandoned baby? Probably Egyptian that I just happened to find by the banks of the Nile, or did the or basically, in the movie, again, the movie explains it better. Whereas in the movie, I think Deborah Paget plays Pharaoh's daughter, and she's a widow. Her husband has died very young. They don't have any children, and she really misses not having a child. And so she tells her father, the Pharaoh, doesn't tell him that basically he's a Hebrew, and he's raised along with Pharaoh's other son, who is Ramses. And if you remember the movie, Yul Brynner is Ramses, and the two of them are raised equally as Egyptian princes. There's this a rivalry between them to see who's going to succeed the Pharaoh when he dies. And so here he's presented as not being a Hebrew and is raised as an Egyptian. Probably the most radical commentary, Sigmund Freud actually wrote a book about Moses. He called it Moses and Monotheism. And his theory was that Moses was an Egyptian. He was actually born into the Egyptian royal house and became a rebel, actually rebelled against the monarchy and became the leader of the Hebrew slaves, even though he himself was not a Hebrew. So that, again, is the most radical kind of take on it. The other thing is that
Why would he have thought that?
why would who have thought what?
Why would Freud have thought that?
It's just his imagination. I guess
Oh, okay.
maybe he couldn't imagine, the Israelites raising a hero like that on their own. It would have to be somebody who already had some stature. The other thing is that Moses is not a Hebrew name. They made up the text makes up what for him by it's related to the word mashach, which means to pull out or draw out something. But Moses actually is an Egyptian name, and you see it in names like Tutmos and Ramoses. It's an Egyptian name, whereas now it's been adopted by the Jews, and it's a very common Jewish name, but it is an Egyptian name, and which is the only reason the kid could get away and stay alive in Pharaoh's court. And obviously, you couldn't have an Egyptian prince walking around with a Hebrew name, and so essentially, by giving him the name Moses, even though there's no way the Pharaoh's daughter is a new Hebrew, or knew to give the baby a Hebrew name. So that's a little bit of folklore that the Bible gets into, but it's basically an Egyptian name. Of course, the question also comes up: how did Aaron escape this? Aaron was Moses' older brother. And the assumption usually is that Aaron is several years older than Moses, and he was already growing up before Pharaoh's decree. So he was okay. It was only the newborns that Pharaoh was trying to snuff out. Also, the other thing we learned from this, what doesn't come across in the translation, is that Miriam is a lot older than Moses, because the Hebrew describes her as an Alma, and an Alma means a young woman of marriageable age, which is younger than we would think of marriageable age, but at least a teenager. And so when Moses was born, Miriam's already a teenager. She's already 12 or 13 years older, than Moses is. And then the next part of the narrative is Moses growing up, and that's verses 11 through 25.
I got that.
Yeah.
Sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. He turned this way and that, seeing no one about, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he found two Hebrews fighting, so he said to the offender, "Why do you strike your fellow?" He retorted, "Who made you chief and ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was frightened and thought, "Then the matter is known, the jig is up." The Pharaoh learned of the matter. He sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh. He arrived in the land of Midian and sat down beside a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them off. Moses rose to their defense, and he watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come back so soon today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why did you leave the man? Ask him to break bread." That's as far as we're going. Is that right? 20?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
Okay.
through 25. Yeah.
Oh, 25. I'll keep trucking. Moses consented to stay with the man. He gave Moses his daughter Zipporah as wife. She bore a son whom he named Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." A long time after that, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites were groaning under the bondage and cried out, and, and their cry for help from the bondage rose up to God. God heard their moaning, and God remembered the covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them.
Yeah. Yeah, this raises a lot of questions. As Moses went out to his brethren, well, how did he know they were his brethren? I mean, he's raised as an Egyptian prince in Pharaoh's palace. One theory is, well, his mother, he was given to his mother to nurse. So at least for a while he was with the Hebrews. And they did nurse children longer, in those days than we do in the modern world. But even at that, he would have been 2.5 or 3 years old maximum when he's turned over to Pharaoh's daughter and raised from the age of 2 or 3 up as an Egyptian. And you really wonder how he really could have had any sense of his Hebrew heritage. Again, the movie has an answer for that because in the movie, Pharaoh's daughter tells him, and when he's old enough, she thinks that he really ought to know where he came from. So she confides in him that he really was a Hebrew by birth. The Bible doesn't tell us this really. It doesn't really give us a mechanism for how he knew, that he was not an Egyptian and was really a Hebrew. And then
So
you have the yeah.
I would just, so why did he act like he kind of looked around before he struck the Egyptian down? Um, it seems kind of like, I don't know, like out of character for Moshe to be so
It does.
like
Yeah.
cowardly. I don't want to use that word, but anyway.
Yeah, because you figure that he is an Egyptian prince. I mean, he outranks this overseer. He could simply tell him lay off or back off and stop beating this guy. In fact, actually, I think it's Rashi or one of the other ancient commentators says this is one of the reasons why Moses was not allowed to go into the promised land. This was one of his initial sins. The usual explanation is in the desert when God tells him to talk to the rock and get water, and he just gets impatient and slams his rod against the rock, and that's the reason given. But Rashi really believes that this is also part of it. There was no need for him to kill the Egyptian, given his rank and his status in Egypt at the time. Of course, the fact that the next day, these Jews are saying, "Who made you a leader over us?" It's kind of ungrateful. I mean, here he's protected one of them by killing an overseer who's beating him. And, this is the thanks he gets from his own people.
Brian, I can
Yeah.
read if you want me to.
Okay. Yeah. Let me just comment on this, though. Again, the version here of the movie also differ. Here, Pharaoh finds out about it and wants to kill him, and Moses, just flees Egypt. In the movie, Ramses sees this as the chance, to get rid of his rival, but he knows that the woman he's going to marry loves Moses and not him, and just to torture her, he decides not to kill Moses, but to leave him alive and drive him out of the desert because it'll actually be worse for her that way. Um, and then, he comes to Midian, which is believed to be somewhere, in the Sinai Desert. Nobody exactly knows where. Um, the interesting thing is, again, he meets the daughters of Jethro at a well, which is really another pattern in Jewish history. The well is the biblical form of the singles bar. Abraham's servant finds Rebecca at a well. Uh, Jacob finds Rachel at the well. Moses finds his future wife at the well. This is where you go to pick up women in the Bible. And naturally, since Jethro has 7 daughters, the fact that this single guy has stumbled into the camp, so he naturally tells his daughters, "Bring him home." It's a chance to get rid of at least one of his daughters,
Hey,
to
Well,
find a husband for them.
in in 18, it says their father's name was Ruel or Ruel,
Yeah,
and then he turns into Jethro. What happens there?
it's Jethro. We don't know. He's referred to later on as Reuel again. He has these 2 names, and nobody really knows why. But Ruel and Jethro are both used interchangeably. It's just like, when Jacob changes his name to Israel, that scene where he wrestles with the angel and the angel says, "You'll no longer be known as Jacob. Now you're Israel." And then the text just goes on referring to him as Jacob. It flips back and forth between Jacob and Israel. He really has 2 names, for the rest of his life.
so if I start hanging out at a well, I might meet my wife.
Well,
Possible.
the singles bar is the closest thing we have to a well now. So Maybe the internet is, who knows?
Oh gosh, the internet is scary.
Okay. So then going on to
Okay.
chapter 3.
I can read if you want.
Yeah, we have, okay, chapter 3, of course, goes into the burning bush episode. And this is 1 through 15, if you want to read that.
One through 15, okay.
Mhm.
Moses was pasturing the flocks of Jethro, his father-in-law, the chief of Midian, and he led the flocks after the free pasture land, and he came to the mountain of God to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from within the thorn bush, and behold, the thorn bush was burning with fire, but the thorn bush was not being consumed. So Moses said, let me turn now and see this great spectacle. Why does the thorn bush not burn up? The Lord saw that he had turned to see, and God called to him from within the thorn bush, and he said, Moses, Moses, and he said, here I am. And he said, do not draw near there. Take your shoes off your feet, because the place upon which you stand is holy soil. And he said, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look towards God. And the Lord said, I've surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I've heard their cry because they're slave drivers, for I know their pains. I descended to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of children of Israel has come to me, and I've also seen the oppression that the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now come, and I will send you to Pharaoh, and take my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should take the children of Israel out of Egypt? But and he said, um, for I will be with you, and this is the sign for you that it was I who sent you. When you take the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And Moses said to God, behold, I come to the children of Israel, and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they say to me, what is his name, and what shall I say to them? God said to Moses, Asher, I'll be when I will be. And he said, so shall you say to the children of Israel, I will be has sent me to you. Um, sorry. And God said further to Moses, so shall you say to the children of Israel, the Lord God of your
No,
forefathers.
stop at that point. It's just the first 15 verses. Yeah. This is one of the most famous stories in the Bible, the burning bush
Oh
story.
yeah, the
Um,
burning bush.
yeah. Of course, one of the things that's interesting is that, in fact, we had a rabbi a few years back, about three rabbis back in Beth Israel, an interesting commentary on this. One is, if you set fire to a bush, it takes hours for it to burn up. I mean, the fact that Moses is standing in front of this bush, it's burning, and is not immediately consumed, you wouldn't expect it to be. You'd probably have to stand there for 3 or 4 hours until the bush totally burns up. So this may not be as much of a miracle as it really sounds like. The other thing which one modern rabbi has commented on is that Moses at the point this happens, Moses is working as a shepherd, and God really seems to favor shepherds. Most of the favored people, starting with Cain and Abel. Abel's a shepherd and Cain is a farmer, and Abel's sacrifice is privileged over Cain's. But Moses is a shepherd. Abraham and Jacob are shepherds. David is a shepherd. He takes care of his father's flock. So there's kind of a bias built in here, apparently for shepherds over agriculturalists. Maybe it's like in the Western movies, where there's always a conflict between the cattlemen and the homesteaders. But then the giveaway that something big is going to happen here, though, is in verse. Let's see. Um, let's, yeah, it's verse 4 where God calls to find out the book says Moses, Moses, and he says, "Here am I." The Hebrew word is Hineni, and it's a tip off. Anytime any character in the Bible says Hineni, something really heavy is going to drop on them. Moses, it's a dead giveaway. It only appears at times in the Bible where God is going to really drop something on some character. And when Moses says Hineni, it kind of seals his fate right there. Um, and of course, Moses obviously says, "Who am I to do it?" Of course, what he's thinking is, if I go back to Egypt, they're going to kill me. Even though the Pharaoh that had exiled him is dead, he has no idea as to who's going to greet him when he goes back. And of course, if you take the movie version, it's Yul Brynner, it's Ramses, who's ascended to the throne after the old Pharaoh died, who he doesn't want to see again. Um, and then he's sort of stalling when he asks God, "What's your name?" And of course, this is the "I am what I am" answer. Although that verse can be translated in about a half a dozen different ways at least, because Hebrew grammar doesn't have a future, present, and past the way English grammar does. All the verbs are either what are called perfect or imperfect. And perfect means completed action, and imperfect means incompleted action. And yeah is actually the verb to be in the imperfect tense. So it can be I am what I am, or I am what I will be, or I will be what I will be, or I will be what I would be. And I mean, you can actually devise any number of translations of this. It's really very vague. The answer that he gives, "I am that I am," just really sounds better in English, so most people settle on that as the proper translation for it. And then he sort of outlines what's going to happen when he goes back. And this is in verses 16 through 22. I want to read that.
Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, "The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I have taken note of you and of what is being done to you in Egypt, and I have declared that I will take you out of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. They will listen to you. Then you shall go with the elders of Israel to the king of Egypt and say to them, The Lord God of Egypt the Lord God of the Hebrews manifest himself to us. Now therefore let us go to a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to our Lord our God. Yet I know that the king of Egypt will only let you go because of a greater might. So I will stretch out my hand and smote Egypt with various wonders, which I will work upon them. After that, he shall let you go. And I will depose the Egyptians favorably toward this people, so that when you go, you will not go empty handed. Each woman shall borrow from her neighbor, and the lodger in her house objects of silver and gold and clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and daughters, thus stripping the Egyptians.
Yeah. And that's part of the Exodus story I've really personally never liked. I mean, basically, what God is saying is, go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. But I've already hardened his heart. He's not going to let them go. And that way I get to do all kind of horrible things to the Egyptians. We're going to show them, who the top god in the Middle East is. It's sort of like I want the founding of this nation to be a shock and awe kind of thing. I don't want you to walk out of Egypt peacefully. I want to be able to do great signs and wonders so that you always remember, the way the nation started. And so, and basically, so a lot of innocent Egyptians are going to really suffer, really, for nothing. And they're Pharaoh's slaves themselves, really. That they have no choice in the matter. In order for God to impress the Israelites with what a great God He is, it's kind of it's a primitive, really, concept of God in a way. Um,
I mean,
but it
so
also, yeah,
sorry, that just like that explanation always bothered me a little bit because it seems to think that that God took away Pharaoh's free will. And that was kind of the whole thing about humans is that we are the critters with free will. And so the way I've heard it and the way that it speaks to me, at least that makes a little more sense, is that I mean, God just hardened the heart to let Pharaoh do what he really wanted to do. I mean, nobody gets to tell Pharaoh no. I mean, can you imagine like
right.
this guy comes out of the desert and is like, who the heck are you?
Uh,
Get out of here.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, well, that occurs several times in the Bible where God predicts this is going to happen, and yet there's free will given anyway. For instance, when Rebecca is pregnant with Esau and Jacob, God tells her the younger one will rule over the older one. And so you figure, why do they have to go through this whole con job, where Jacob has to pretend to be Esau? I mean, God already ordained this from the very beginning. And it's an insoluble philosophical problem in a way. Can you reconcile God's foreknowledge with human free will? And the classic statement on it really is in the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiba, who's one of the big rabbis of the second century, basically just said everything is foreseen and yet choice is given, which of course is a paradox. And the rabbinic attitude is, yeah, it's a paradox. Live with it. We're limited human beings. Our minds are not big enough to encompass the total picture. And so we have paradoxes. And this occurs over and over again. God has already ordained something's going to happen, but we still hold people responsible for what they did or didn't do. But to me, it would have been made more sense from a humane point of view. Like instead of hardening Pharaoh's heart, he could have softened it. He could, just said, gee, I've been thinking about it and slavery is wrong. You guys can go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just strike the Egyptians blind for a few days and let the Egyptians peacefully walk out. You didn't have to do this whole shock and awe thing and devastate the entire land of Egypt, to get where you are. But, that's the way it is. Um,
Yeah, but
then
where would the
going over
story
to,
be? There would be no story if he just snapped his fingers
yeah,
and they were gone.
exactly. And if you assume that this is being written by people, centuries later, who are creating this founding myth for their people. Basically, you want really these kind of heroics. You you know it, to say, well, Pharaoh let us go, and that's it. Uh, it's if Abe Lincoln had said, to the South, you should let your slaves go, and they said, yeah, you're right, we'll let them go. We don't need to have a war about it. Just let them go. So maybe this the same kind of thing. Um, and And then, as you go to chapter 4, God does a bunch of magic tricks to show, Moses that he's really God. But the nub of the thing is that Moses tries to get out of it. And this is, if you look at verse 10 in chapter 4, um, uh, Moses says, and Moses said unto the Lord, O Lord, I am not a man of words, neither heretofore, or since thou was spoken unto thy servant, for I am slow of speech and of a slow tongue. And, basically, this became a biblical pattern. If God calls on you for a mission, you get out of it if you can. Moses starts with this. Isaiah, when he's called to be a prophet, says, I'm a man of unclean lips from an unclean people." Jeremiah says, "I'm just a kid. I'm not mature enough to do this." Jonah doesn't say anything. He just jumps on a ship to get as far away from Nineveh as he can. So Moses is really kind of starting a pattern here. And there's really a great midrash on this. The midrash is a story that when Moses is growing up as a baby in Pharaoh's court, some of the courtiers start a rumor that this child is going to grow up and take your kingdom away from you. And of course, his adopted mother tries to defend him, and they finally agree to set up a test for Moses. They take the child and they sit him in front of two vessels. One vessel is full of gold coins. The other vessel is full of hot coals. If he reaches for the gold coins, that means he wants the kingdom, and he should be killed before he can grow up and take it away from Pharaoh. If he reaches for the coals, then it's okay. And God guides Moses' hand. He reaches for the hot coals, which saves his life, but it burns his hand. And he immediately puts his hand in his mouth and burns his lips and tongue. And this is where the slow of speech thing comes from.
Haven't heard that one. That's an interesting one.
Yeah. And then let's see. And they argue back and forth, and finally God says, "That's enough excuses. You're going to do it." Um, and so the story really picks up with verse 19 in chapter 4, really next, which is one of the strangest stories in the Bible, really. It's a short story from 19 through 23. Someone wants to read that.
Sure.
And the Lord said to Moses and Midian, Go, return to Egypt, for all the men who sought your life are dead. And Moses took his wife and his sons and mounted them on the donkey, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took God's staff in his hand, and the Lord said to Moses, When you set out to return to Egypt, see all the portents that I have put in your hand, and do them before Pharaoh. But I, on my part, shall toughen his heart, and he will not send the people away. And you shall say to Pharaoh, Thus said the Lord, My son, my firstborn is Israel. And I said to you, Send off my son, that he may worship me. And you refused to send him off. And look, I am about to kill your son, your firstborn. And it happened on the way at the night camp that the Lord encountered him and sought to put him to death. And Zipporah took a flint and took off her son's foreskin and touched it to his feet. And she said, Yes, a bridegroom of blood you are to me. And he let him go. Then did she say, A bridegroom of blood by the circumcising.
This is one that drives the commentators nuts because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense totally. To begin with, here is Moses taking his family back into Egypt with him. But yet later on, after the Exodus, we have this episode where Jethro comes to the Israelite camp to visit Moses, and he brings Moses' wife and children with him. So either there's a contradiction in the text, or actually maybe after this episode, she turned back, went back to her father with her sons. It's the only really plausible explanation. Um, the it's not clear why God would try to kill Moses after he's just sending him on this mission. The only explanation some of the rabbis came up with is that he neglected circumcising his sons. And so Zipporah did that for him. But the whole thing is just kind of weird. And most of the modern commentators think it's probably part of a bigger story, and most of it was just lost. And what we really have here is a fragment of a much larger story. And this is all that remains of it. And that's why it just doesn't make any obvious sense. And picking up with verse 27, Moses now comes back to talk to the people. Um, and he he's introduced by Aaron to the elders of the people, and everybody he gets a great reception. He's coming as the Redeemer, um, but initially it really doesn't work out that well. Um, if The last part of the parsha is 1 through 23, verses 1 through 23 on chapter 5. Someone wants to read that.
I got it.
Okay.
Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Let my people go, that they may celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, Who is this Lord, that I should heed him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go. They answered, The God of the Hebrews has become manifest to us. Let us go, we pray, a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to our God, lest God strike us with pestilence or sword. But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you distract the people from their tasks? Get to your labors. And Pharaoh continued, The people of the land are already so numerous, and you would have them cease from their labors. The same day Pharaoh charged the taskmasters and overseers of the people, saying, You shall no longer provide the people with straw for making bricks, as heretofore. Let them go and gather straw for themselves, but impose upon them the same quota of bricks as they have been making heretofore. Do not reduce it, for they are shirkers. That is why they cry, Let us go and sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid upon those involved. Let them keep at it and pay not attention to deceitful promises. So the taskmasters and overseers of the people went out and said to the people, Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you any straw. You must go and get the straw yourselves wherever you can find it, but there shall be no decrease whatever in your work. Then the people scattered through the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw, and the taskmasters pressed them, saying, You must complete the same work assignment each day as when you had straw. And the overseers of the Israelites, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten. Why? They were asked, Did you not complete the prescribed amount of bricks, either yesterday or today, as you did before? Then the overseers of the Israelites came to Pharaoh and cried, Why do you deal thus with your servants? No straw is issued to your servants, yet they demand of us make bricks. Thus your servants are being beaten, when the fault is with your own people. He replied, You are shirkers, shirkers. That is why you say, Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Be off now to your work. No straw shall be issued to you, but you must produce your quota of bricks. Now, the overseers of the Israelites found themselves in trouble because of the order, You must not reduce your daily quantity of bricks. As they left Pharaoh's presence, they came upon Moses and Aaron, standing in their path, and they said to them, May the Lord look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers, putting a sword in their hands to slay us. Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, O Lord, why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with his people, and still you have not delivered your people.
So to me, it raises two questions. Number one, how did Moses ever get to talk to Pharaoh in the first place? I mean, it's almost like if in the antebellum South, a couple of black slaves had walked into the mansion of the governor of Mississippi and said, "We want to talk to you about the condition on the plantations here." The whole thing seems absurd, except again, the movie gives a better explanation. Because, in the movie, Ramses and Moses grew up together as kids in Pharaoh's palace. And so Moses kind of has an in. In the movie, it kind of makes more sense. But without that background, it's kind of ridiculous, that this foreign slave, would just simply walk into Pharaoh's court. He'd be stopped before we ever got anywhere near, the inner part of Pharaoh's palace. The other interesting thing is that at first things actually get worse for the Hebrews because of Moses. And it was kind of striking because actually I'm right in the middle of reading a biography of Martin Luther King, and he actually had a similar situation. After the Montgomery bus boycott, which is where he really starts his career. Then you had all the marches and the sit-ins and sitting at the lunch counters, and And particularly in places like Alabama and Mississippi, there was a violent white reaction to that. Churches were bombed, houses were set on fire, blacks were attacked on the street. And there were a lot of older, more conservative blacks, like the leadership of the NAACP at the time, who actually accused Martin Luther King of making things worse, by pushing too hard, too fast. It was actually triggering this violent white reaction. And their theory was, we're getting there slowly. We have the Supreme Court decision of 1954, the Brown v. Board of Education. President Kennedy keeps on promising he'll have a civil rights bill, even though he hasn't yet. But if we stay quiet and if we're patient, things will happen over time. And you're making things much worse with all these marches and sit-ins and provoking the whites. It's really a very similar situation.
Is it time to
Provoking
quit
the
yet?
What did you say?
I said, is it time to quit yet?
Yes, it is actually. That's the end of the parsha. Does anybody have any other questions or comments?
I always thought it was interesting. This is the only time in where God is redundant. He tells Moses to remove the sandals from his feet. Where else would he have had them?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of that kind of stuff in the Bible.
Understand?
Yeah. Really, if you're not coming to it from a religious point of view, the movie probably tells the story better. It's more
Well,
conceivably
the
so.
story has the movie has the benefit of hindsight.
Correct.
It does, yeah. Yeah, but it really makes the story, they smoothed out all the inconsistencies and, they
Right.
filled in all the blanks. And they really give a better, if you're presenting the story to children for the first time, I'd probably have them see the movie before they read the Bible.
Or or go watch was it Prince of Egypt? Or what's the other cartoon?
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
that
pretty
one I
good.
didn't see. That got good reviews. I didn't see
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I
I think
watched it.
the Ten Commandments is still the iconic movie, though.
Yep.
That's the official version.
The official
Okay,
version.
right. Okay.
Okay, so we start with chapter 6 next week.
Yeah, basically, the next parsha will be starting actually with verse 2 of chapter 6. Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good. You guys have a good week. We'll see you next week.
So, okay. See you
Thanks.
next week.
Drive safe,
Yep.
Chris.
Thank you. I will.
Have a great week, y'all.
You too, Michael.
Okay,
See ya.
see you next week.